We are good to go. What is going on, everybody? How are we doing today? Hope everyone is doing great on this fine Tuesday. For those of you that are in the Northeast, we are still seemingly having good weather, which is hilarious. There's always that period in November where the temperatures decide to stick around at around 70 degrees before things begin to plummet, and we get the inevitable period where everybody in the Northeast tries to figure out what the hell they're still doing here. But that period is coming soon. Ooh, I do have a little teaser up there for you of a car that we're going to be talking about. But today we do have a lot of information, and like I alluded to, for those of you that are in the Facebook chat, again, we are broadcasting on Facebook and YouTube as well. So whatever is more comfortable for you per se, feel free to jump over there. But there's a lot of Hyundai news today, which is kind of funny. But with that being said, if there's anything that you guys also want to talk about, feel free to include that in the chat. The chat is something that is very key to this stream, and it's something that, like, honestly powers the stream. So if we want to dissuade some of the Hyundai talk, feel free, let me know. But I'm going to get the podcast recording started, and we'll get this ship underway. Good morning. Good evening, everybody, and how are we doing today? I am Thanasi, and this right here is the MoneyShift podcast. And for everyone that's listening on the podcast right now, just as a friendly reminder, we do stream on Facebook and on YouTube. You can find us on MoneyShift podcast on YouTube and MoneyShift podcast on Facebook. There you can see the stream one day early. Whoa. But also, you can really just tag along and see the photos of the cars that I'm talking about. Sometimes that tends to really mold the image of the podcast better, right? Because you have a full vision of everything. You can see what we're talking about live, and especially because a lot of the things that we're referencing are these new vehicles, right? So these are a lot of cars that maybe you haven't even heard of or seen before. So to be able to put faces to the names, if you will, can be valuable. But anyway, before we get into today's news, let's just go into a little update about me. So you guys know this Civic. This isn't anything new. I talked about this car last week. This is the Project C trim. Fred posted that in the chat last week, and that completely threw me for a loop. He said, "Is that the Project C trim?" And I didn't understand, or he said Project Yes trim. That's what he said. And I didn't understand that yes is C in Spanish, and C in Spanish is spelled SI, which means it's a Honda Civic SI. Those two things didn't mold together in my head, and I was let down. I was so mad at myself for not putting two and two together there. Oh man, you gotta. It was wild. But anyway, so this is the car, right? We've talked about it before. It's a K-swap hatch on some pretty crude coilovers with wheels that are way too wide for what it is. So the process has sort of begun in terms of what we're going to be doing to make this car track ready. And by track ready, I mean something that can be run over an entire day without wanting to rip its own face off, right? So that for this car means it needs a new suspension setup to get rid of those True Heart coilovers that are on there, which if anybody wants those, let me know. Shoot me a DM. And then also it means trading in these big wide wheels for something that is a little bit smaller with just as much tire, as much as we can fit under there. But yeah, so that process is going on right now. I got a bunch of wheels in mind that I'm curious about. Advan RZ2s, Volk CE28s, things like that. And I'm really, really excited to get that going. It's the winter here in the Northeast, which means that track season is effectively over. There are some brave souls that are running events at the end of the month, which is something that's intriguing to me. But at the same time, I don't really want to pay a couple $100 for an event that might not even happen due to snow, and then these events are all not refundable. So anyway, I'm going to call it a season. But with that means that I don't really need the car, which means if there's long wait times for anything, now's really the time to order all those parts. That's the real interesting thing about the Northeast car scene is, people often say, hey, when I order my parts from Japan or things like that, I have a 3-4 month wait time. Well, it's November, and if I have a 3-4 month wait time, that puts me into early 2021 if you order now or in the next month. And what that means is that all those parts are going to be here before the real next season happens here in the Northeast. So that's exciting that you can sort of go through that process right now. And there seemingly are a lot of Black Friday era deals on a lot of places for wheels or for suspension or for anything of the like. There is a lot of that stuff going on now. So if you guys are really looking, where are the deals? Let me know where you see them, where you find them. Because it is an interesting time. There's people that are doing 15% off wheels. There's people that are doing suspension deals. Never mind the fact that Amazon, Target, and all these other locations are just doing Black Friday all month, which is kind of weird, but anyway. So this is a real fun time for me. Can get my bearings going on that and start modifying that machine. But enough about me. Enough about this Civic. You guys hear about this Civic every week. And no, the Phaeton has not died yet. That car is still alive and well, and it is a lovely machine. But with that, let's get into this week's news. So one of the things that MoneyShift really tries to do for everyone is, if you're at the water cooler or if you're with a bunch of car people, you're up to date and you're in the know for everything that is going on. So that is inclusive of project releases, that is inclusive of concept cars, that's inclusive of car releases or anything like that, or just really interesting things that are going on in the car world. And what we're talking about first is one of those interesting things. So Porsche has started doing this series called Porsche Unseen. And what it's showing off is cars that have never seen the light of day but were made. So these are cars that were designed and fully baked out and thought out, but were just never produced. And there's varying reasons as to why, but they're doing a bunch of these. I think they're doing about 10 of them. And this was the first one. So this car right here was supposed to be a recall, a throwback, a flashback, or whatever you want to call it, back to the 550 Spider. So what Porsche is sort of showing off in this render, if you will, even though it was effectively a fully baked out car, is a modern version of what the 550 Spider could have looked like. And it's a car that looks incredible. I mean, again, we're talking about project images here, but it's a 550 Spider in 2020, and you can imagine Porsche's modern design language being input into something like that, and that's what we got here. I personally think it's really cool, but to me it's not as exciting as the second one that they unveiled, which was a Le Mans sort of privateer sort of car. When they released this car, which by the way looks like an absolutely mental Le Mans prototype by Porsche, but also something that looks like it could be driven on the street, kind of like a modern day successor to the 996 or 993 GT1 cars, if you will. But this was the second car in their sort of unseen version. So if you guys like companies coming out, companies showing things that they could have done or things that they thought about working on, check out Porsche's Instagram, check out this Unseen campaign, Porsche Unseen, because some really, really cool stuff is coming out of that, and stuff that you guys definitely should look at. It's always interesting to get a view under the hood of some of these automakers and the things that they could have produced. I love seeing that. Stuff like that is really interesting to me. We got insights into that with Honda, with the NSX, how they almost made it front engine, how they almost then made it all these different configurations. I love just seeing automakers be vulnerable, right? Not everyone's perfect. And this is a good example of that. Porsche almost produced all these things, but they did not. But anyway, let's get into something that probably should not have been produced. And I'm curious if there's anyone in the chat, if you guys could tell me what this car is valued to you. So what I'm about to show you is something that is beyond belief, something that I couldn't even, when I saw this headline on, every single news site that I check in the morning to keep you guys up to date, I had to read this 2 or 3 times because there was no way that my mind was able to wrap around the fact that this vehicle existed. So I'm going to show it to everyone on the stream. I'm going to talk about it. Nina, yes, there's a ton of new cars coming out. So if you have the time, hang around. Definitely, definitely stay tuned because there's a bunch of stuff coming. The first new car that's coming out is this crazy, crazy thing. This right here is the Anzom Palladium. Okay, what I'm showing for everyone listening to the podcast, I'm showing this big blue ball. If you guys haven't seen this, pull over or go to the right of your running lane, however you're listening to the MoneyShift podcast, and look up AZNOM Palladium, the AZNOM Palladium. What you're looking at is a Ram truck that is turned into a Rolls-Royce fighter. So I'm going to repeat that sentence one more time because it kind of threw me for a loop at first, but it all makes sense in a second. So this AZNOM Palladium is a Ram that is a Rolls-Royce fighter. Now, for those of you that know the Rolls-Royce Phantom, Nina, among others, know and have seen these Rolls-Royces, you know that they're really big machines. The Phantom is not a small car, so for a company to take a pickup truck and try to convert it into a Phantom fighter, well, they're on par when it comes to size, but what they aren't on par with is quality and interior and refinement and luxury features and power, right? Because aside from the Ram TRX, there isn't really a high power pickup truck. And one of the things that these high class cars like the Phantom do is they provide the ability to just quickly get you to speed, right? It's thrust, if you will. And one of the things the Anzom, or I keep calling it Anzom, but it's AZNOM. Apologies to AZNOM here. One of the things that AZNOM tries to do is they take a Ram and they heavily revise it. So let's get into what that means. So this thing is absolutely massive. It is 20 feet tall. Nina says it looks like they smushed a Rolls Royce. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting design that takes a lot of cues from those big cars. So they took a Ram 1500, which is, again, a 20-foot long car or truck, and they twin turboed the 5.7 liter that comes stock in a Ram 1500. So now this AZNOM makes 700 horsepower and 701 pound-feet of torque. And much like the Ram 1500, you can also get the e-torque mile hybrid system as an option, which is hilarious that they're offering that. AZNOM estimates that this vehicle can reach 60 in 4.5 seconds, which is incredible for something that's this big. Especially when we found out last week that I think it was like 4.2 seconds the Ram TRX did. So for this behemoth to be in that same ballpark is wild. But it can reach a top speed of 131 miles an hour, which, let's be honest, I don't think anybody wants to drive this thing faster than 70 because it's a luxury pickup truck. When we get into the inside, that's where things get even crazier, but kind of funnier to me at the same time. So for those of you that are watching the live stream and looking at this photo right now, a lot of things are very similar to the truck that you know and love. So the Ram 1500 features a very long screen in the center that's very Tesla-esque, and that is the screen that is in the AZNOM, okay? Everything else is Ram affair in the front, okay? So the steering wheel, the gauge cluster, the UI, even the device that changes it to park, reverse, neutral, drive, right? All of that is Ram. What isn't Ram are the seats. What isn't Ram is the leather on the center console. What isn't Ram is leather on the dash. Things like that. This is where AZNOM really came in and tried to zhuzh up the Ram 1500, okay? But it gets even crazier because when you make our way to the back seats, that is where the AZNOM is completely revised. There is few things here that are in common with the Ram. Sure, the door handles might be similar and maybe some other pieces, but they converted the rear to really kind of look like a couch. It has its own separate air conditioning system to keep everybody comfortable. It has a refrigerator. There's a Harman Kardon audio system, and there's 2 Microsoft Surface X Pro tablets for everybody in the back. But if you're looking at this photo, it's like a couch. There's no There's no divider in the middle, which is kind of weird for an executive sedan. But I mean, executive sedan. Do you call it that? Because that's what they're going for, even though it's a pickup. We'll call it an executive pickup. But it was interesting to see that they sort of went with this couch vibe instead of a true executive saloon car, which is like where you have seating just for two people and the massive center console in the middle that either controls the seats or the HVAC or the displays or things like that. So weird to see Asnom go for this. This isn't their first time trying to transform a 1500 Ram into a opulent SUV. They did this back in 2018, where they actually more crudely ripped off a Ram 1500. If you guys look at the original Asnom car, you'll see that it literally looks like a Ram 1500 with this same little hatchback sort of vibe that this one has. But everything else is Ram affair in that car. So this one, at the very least, differentiates a little more, but at the end of the day, it's still relatively similar to the Ram. When it comes to pricing, there's no real word on it. You get a full set of luggage if you decide that the Asnom is the right vehicle for you, which is super nice of them, because you're going to need a lot more than luggage to really justify this car purchase. But anyway, I'm sure it's overpriced for what is effectively a Ram with a modified leather interior. Yeah, this thing is big time ugly for sure. And I'm super happy that there's a large chance that I will never see this vehicle ever again. Thank goodness. So why am I showing you now a Subaru BRZ? So on the next subject, we're going to talk about the European automotive market, because it's something that's really been interesting to me within the past few weeks of news alone, never mind what we have ahead. So in the past few weeks, we've learned, one, the new Golf GTI is going to not offer a manual option in Europe, but they're going to offer a manual option in the USA, which is similar to the Porsche GT3. The only reason why that car got a manual again was because of the US market, but that's another example of Europe really not caring, or there not being as big of a market for these cars as there is in the United States. Well, another example of that is Subaru with the BRZ. A Subaru spokesperson told Autocar that the company has no plans, I repeat, no plans to bring the two-door sports car to Europe. And Fred, you're right. I am talking about a BRZ, and I haven't driven yours yet. That is coming 100%. You better believe it. But I was very dumbfounded when I found out that Subaru was not going to be releasing the the BRZ in Europe. Now, that's not to say that they're not going to release the 8.6 in Europe. So there's potentially still a variant of this vehicle that will exist on the other side of the world. But it was interesting for me to find out that a country that really does revere and produce a lot of small, nimble vehicles, that Subaru deemed it not a big enough market to release the next generation of the BRZ. And Volkswagen also deemed the European market not one that was fit for a manual GTI. That's just interesting. I don't know. Does anybody watching have an idea why, or any belief as to why Europe doesn't want a manual GTI, or maybe they don't want a BRZ? I don't know. I thought that was very, very weird, but it was definitely news nonetheless, and things that you should be aware of, because that is interesting. Nina says, when you have time, can you explain the 2008 Cadillac XLR? Explain in what sense? Are you looking for why that car existed, or what about it? Because I think the Cadillac XLR, which for those of you that aren't aware, was really Cadillac's Corvette, right? It was Cadillac's take on the luxury, high-end convertible world. They were trying to take on cars like the Mercedes SL. I love it. I think the XLR design is one that's aged pretty well. I think the XLR V is really, really cool, because even though Cadillac could have easily used the Chevrolet Z06 or something like that engine, they decided to keep it all in-house and use the North Star motor, which is interesting. In terms of history, To the XLR, I can give you a brief sort of synopsis on that car, but admittedly, I am not a XLR massive resource. That said, the reason why they produced the car was to go after the Mercedes SL and really bolster their way into that market. When Cadillac came out with the XLR, that was really Cadillac's big push to try and take it to the German brands. Lewis says the XLR should have came out 4 years later with an LSA. You're 100% right. I think if the XLR released today, it would be monumental. As Fred notes, Caddies do look really good right now. Every single Cadillac model's got it going on. They got a better interior than they did back when the XLR launched. And they have better engine options, and they have better chassis options. The Alpha chassis is amazing. Lewis knows he's driven an ATS-V for a bit, and they're just really, really great cars. But the XLR, when it launched, you could either get a 320 horsepower Northstar V8, or you could get a 443 horsepower 4.4 liter Northstar V8 that was supercharged. So they didn't use the Corvette stuff, they used the Northstar stuff, which was interesting. And yeah, Lewis says, I forgot how awful the XLR interior was. That era of GM produced some really interesting interiors. And by really interesting, I mean plastic interiors. But that said, the XLR had some things that were really interesting. Like it had steel hydroformed frame rails, aluminum cockpit. It had some things that really they tried their best, and I think they produced a good car. I just think it was at the wrong time. The XLR had magnetic ride control. Did you guys know that? That was the first GM vehicle that had magnetic ride. It was standard on the XLR and XLR-V. The system used 4 wheel-to-body displacement sensors to measure wheel motion. It's a really comfy car. Nina just said it. It's actually really comfy, and you're totally right. The magnetic ride is an amazing suspension system, and it was even when the XLR came out, never mind how great it is today. So I think there is a market for Cadillac to produce an XLR today, but it definitely just fell at the wrong time. I mean, the XLR-V is selling for 40 grand, and that might be a good buy, by the way. If you're looking into something that is kind of rare and maybe underappreciated, maybe that car does surge in value at one point. But anyway, hope that was a great little synopsis, a little tangent for you, Nina. I do love the Cadillac XLR. I think it's awesome, and I think yours is an amazing spec. But let's go back to the news, shall we? With the BRZTs out of the way, we got a lot of Hyundai stuff to cover. So I mentioned this at the beginning. Hyundai came out hard this week. Really hard. Yeah, big sales in Jersey for the XLR. You're totally right. So let's talk about the Hyundai news that came out, and let's talk about what's going on. So first off, what I'm showing on the screen right now is the Hyundai Sonata N-Line. So this was Hyundai's recent unveiling. It's the top dog in the lineup, unlike some other brands like the Accord 2OT Sport and the TRD. What's up, Glenn? How you doing? Thanks for chiming in. I appreciate that. But the Sonata N-Line, its main goal is to be the sporty variant in the Hyundai lineup, in the Hyundai Sonata lineup, but it's also the top dog. So in some of the other, in its other competition, the Passat, the Accord, the Camry, the Mazda 6, things like that, the sporty variant often doesn't hold a candle to the top dog, but in Hyundai's lineup, it does. So it means you get a 2.5 liter 4-cylinder engine that makes 290 horsepower and 311 pound-feet of torque, which is a good amount and something that puts it right in line or above most of its competition. Something that's great about the Sonata is it's backed up by an 8-speed wet dual clutch, which was huge. Oftentimes when you looked at Hyundai cars, you saw a dual clutch and you were like, wait a minute, cars like the Hyundai Ioniq had a dual clutch. Cars like the Kia Soul had a dual clutch, but they weren't wet dual clutches, which is like something in a GTI or a PDK unit or something like that. Not that I'm saying that this is the level of a PDK unit, but it's better than the dry dual clutch that's in cars like the Hyundai Ioniq, right? Which if you've driven are very lackluster and leave something. They're better than CVTs, but they're not the best. Anyway, What also is good about the Sonata N line is it's not just power, right? In cars like the Accord Sport or things like that, it is just a power upgrade. But in the Hyundai Sonata N line, not only do you get the revised engine internals with improved cooling and thermal management, but you also get an improved steering ratio, so quicker turning. You have firmer rear springs, thicker front and rear anti roll bars, end-tuned dampers, and stiffer engine, transmission, and suspension mounts. And you get larger 13.6-inch front brakes and 12.8 rear brakes, which are pretty big, especially on a sedan, like a mid-size sedan. So I'm really excited for this. And the announcement that Hyundai had this week about the Sonata N line was the price. It comes in at $33,200, which Hyundai's always been one of the kings of value, going back to the Tiburons and things like that. The prices they always charged for these vehicles was right in line or way below their competition. And $33,200 sounds like a good deal for me. Nico asks, can you still tune those dry ones? Yeah, they hold power. Cars like the Optima, cars like the Sonata, the 2OT, the last gen that had the dry dual clutch could handle mild upgrades. But in terms of feel and how it was to use, they were nowhere near their current competition, right? They're leagues away from even the automatic, the 10-speed automatic that Honda had. So I'm hopeful that this wet dual clutch that is introduced not only in this Sonata N line, but also in the Veloster N that's coming out, will be something that really brings it to the foreground and makes it a really fun car because it has all the intangibles. And to be frank, I'm a really big fan of the Sonata's look on the outside and in. So I'm really hopeful that this can put them on the map, or maybe drive a lot of sales that produces a faster variant, a true Sonata N that isn't a Sonata N line. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with that. I'm hopeful, but we'll see. In other Hyundai news, Hyundai launched their new SUV, the Tucson. So for those of you watching, I want your thoughts on the new Hyundai Tucson. I'm dropping the images in the live stream, which again, we record on the day before the podcast drops. So it's every Tuesday, usually around 5, 6 o'clock. You can find it on Facebook or YouTube. But this is the Hyundai Tucson. So I'm going to give you a quick detail overview, and then we're going to talk about why Hyundai pre-dented this from factory. They didn't actually, but there's just a lot of angles and a lot of things going on with this Hyundai Tucson. So we'll quickly talk about the engine because that's probably the most important part when it comes to these things. The 2022 Hyundai Tucson Hybrid has the turbocharged 1.6 liter inline 4 with a 44 kilowatt electric motor and a 1.49 kilowatt hour battery pack, which gives it 226 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque. That's a little bit more than the 200 that's in the Sonata and Elantra hybrid, so they're really giving this thing the beans right here. The Tucson hybrid also gets a 6-speed automatic, not a CVT, thank the Lord. And it gets standard all-wheel drive, and it gets 30% better fuel economy than the gasoline engine version, which means it'll likely get around 36 miles to the gallon, which if you guys are privy to the hybrid SUV lineup is a little less than the RAV4, but to be able to get 36 plus MPG in a small SUV is wild. They're also going to be offering the Tucson as a plug-in hybrid using the same turbocharged 4-cylinder motor, but instead this is mated to a larger battery. So instead of a 1.49 kilowatt hour battery pack, now the plug-in hybrid has a 13.8 kilowatt hour battery pack with a 66.9 kilowatt electric motor, which is up 22, I can't do math, up 22 from the hybrid model, which means this gets 261 horsepower and 280 pound-feet of torque. This car gets 28 miles on electric only and plug-in trim, which is pretty great. And it gets 70 mpg. E of fuel economy. Nico says it looks like it has the front grille of a new Blazer and fender flares from a RAV4. That's actually a great call out with the fender flares. They do look right off the new RAV4 in terms of how boxy and angular they are. But where the Tucson hybrid takes it, and Tucson in general, takes it a step further, is just the flared, I don't know, the box flares. What is this, like that line that you see right over here in the rear door that just makes it kind of wider looking? I don't know, it's just an interesting design cue for whatever reason. If power is more important than you, or to you, than efficiency, which for a lot of us watching and a lot of us listening, it likely is, Hyundai is going to be making a Tucson N line. So we talked about the Sonata N line having 290 horsepower, but they're also going to put that engine in the Tucson. So you'll be able to get 290 horsepower, 311 pound-feet of torque, and a 2.5-liter turbo engine, which is pretty cool. That thing's probably going to be really fast. And one of the faster little sport compact SUVs. Yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to see how this looks in person. I think the interior is really great and probably one of the best in the segment. But I think the exterior design is incredibly polarizing, and I don't see this car aging well. But in an era where a lot of people are seemingly flipping cars in 2 to 3 years, maybe that's okay, right? I mean, I'm one to talk in that example. Anyway, another Hyundai that comes pre-dented, if you will, which means it leverages a similar design to the Tucson, is the Elantra. But what is interesting about the Elantra is they've recently teased the new Elantra N. They showed us 2 images, one of the front, one of the rear. I'll show the rear off in a second. But for you guys that are watching, let me know what you think about this design, because while it's camouflaged in all these little N's, you can really see everything. We've already seen what the Elantra looks like, so if you guys haven't seen that, just go to your local Google search and type in 2022 or 2021 Hyundai Elantra, and you'll get to see what the base one looks like. But this one is the N, not N line, N, right? So this puts it on par with the Veloster N. Okay. Fred says Z for Zorro. If you flip these ends to the side, it's just a bunch of Z's. Yeah, that's definitely their goal. Lewis says, I'm kind of tired of the whole tablet cluster look. I don't mind an LCD cluster, but make it a shape like Audi does. I hate how it looks like a tablet propped onto the dash. So what he's referencing is the Tucson interior, where you're totally right. The instrument cluster does look like a dash, but I will caveat, their center stack does look a lot better than modern Toyotas that effectively looks like an Etch-a-Sketch. But yeah, I totally agree. I'm tired of the tablet stuff. I'm tired of it. Oh yeah, the belt line. Yeah, you're also right. That is a Z. Looking at the side doors here, Fred says, look at the belt line, and you'll see a Z right there. That is a straight Z, and that is definitely a Zorro implant. It is, in fact, a literal Z. But let's talk about what the Elantra N is going to look like and what it's going to be. Well, it's no surprise that this thing is probably going to leverage the same motor that is in the Veloster N, which means it's going to have a 2-liter turbo engine. And like the Veloster N, it is likely going to have 275 horsepower, which puts it north of the GTI, north of a lot of its competition, which includes the Civic Si sedan, because you got to remember where this thing is probably going to slot in price-wise, which is upper 20s. And Fred, I totally agree with you. 7 out of 10 on the rear end. The rear 3-quarter view of this car is a lot better than the front end, actually monumentally better. It includes a small wing, a very aggressive rear bumper. I love the taillight design on the new Elantra. But yeah, so 275 horsepower, and that might not seem like a lot of horsepower because, you know, we live in an era where Dodge has an 840 horsepower car, but for something that is as small as the Elantra is, remember, this is a Civic-sized car, that's 75 horsepower more than the new Civic Si. So that's a substantial amount more, and it's 25 more than the GTI as well. So it's definitely not lacking on power. And because this thing is an N and not an N line, we're likely going to see things like a limited slip differential, upgraded suspension, upgraded brakes. If the Veloster N is any indication of what Hyundai is able to produce when it comes to fun vehicles to drive, this will surely be that. So if you can get around how this car looks, remember the Zorro per Fred on the right side of this car, it's probably going to be an absolute hoot to drive. So definitely consider it. I think it's awesome. I think it's going to be great. I mean, I'm all for fun cars. Like this car or not, you should want this thing to beat your favorite car. So if you're a Volkswagen fan, you should want the Elantra N to be better than a new GTI. If you're a Honda fan, you should want the Elantra N to be better than the new Civic Si. Why do I say that? I say that because if this car is better than the existing Civic Si and the existing GTI, it then forces Honda, it then forces Volkswagen to make and create better machines, right? If something better comes out, your fan base isn't going to have it, right? Honda's not, if you're a Honda fan, I'm a Honda fan. You guys are out there. Some of you are Honda fans. I know some people in the chat own GTIs, right? You're going to want your company to produce a vehicle that is better than what Hyundai produce, right? So the hope here is that competition makes everybody better, right? So if this Elantra N is good, that means the next Civic Si should be great if it leverages this as a benchmark. And the next GTI will probably be frumpy and boring looking. But anyway, Fred says, kinda Audi-ish and weirdly Lincoln looking. Go ahead, try and unsee it. And he likes the rear quarter window. It's a nice line. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is going to be one of those cars where I think you have to see it in person in order to really form an opinion about its looks because of how jarring a lot of the design elements are. There's a lot of lines on this thing. Less lines than are on the new Tucson, thank the Lord. But at the same time, there's a lot of lines on this thing. A lot. And that's the face that I get looking at it. That's for sure. But moving on, before we get to probably the most beautiful car that has ever graced this podcast airwaves, this will actually be slightly smaller than a Jetta. The new Jetta is pretty big. This is probably more in line with the Civic in terms of sizing, the Civic sedan. But anyway, moving on again to what I think will be the prettiest car in this podcast or in this airwaves, we're going to talk about this fine machine right here. What is this? And what am I talking about? Those on the podcast are probably banging their heads against the dashboard. What is he showing? What I'm showing is a Volvo P1800. Now, the Volvo P1800 is a design that Volvo released leagues ago. This is an ancient Volvo, and in fact the car that held the mileage record for the longest time, right? It was actually one of, if not the first car to grace 1 million miles, was an original Volvo P1800 and is one of the better designs in the space. So why am I showing you this? Well, this just isn't any Volvo P1800. This is a Volvo P1800 that is designed by Cyan Racing. And for those of you that don't know who Cyan Racing is, Cyan Racing controls any and every Volvo race machine and their counterparts. So Lynk & Co., if they have a race car, it's Cyan. Volvo, if they have a race car, it's Cyan, right? They're the motorsports division. So what are they doing making Volvo P1800s, excuse me? Well, what they're doing is they're, quote-unquote, singerizing them. So what that means is they're reproing them, but making them pinnacle machines. So the top of the top. If you look at a Singer 911, what it does is it takes the recipe and it attempts to perfect it, and it also charges a lot of money for it. And that's exactly what Cyan Racing is going to do with this P1800 Cyan Edition. So what is this car and what does it have? Why should you spend, and we'll get to what it costs in a second, but why should you spend all this money on a Volvo P1800? Fred already says, shut up and take my money. Well, friend, it gets better. This is a 420 horsepower and 335 pound-feet of torque machine. The engine is based on the same one that powers the Volvo S60 TC1 race car. Cyan re-engineered its power delivery specifically for this car. And what they released this week, and the reason why I'm showing this car, is the engine bay shot. We had only seen the front and rear three-quarter views of this car, but what we have yet to see was how the engine looked sitting in the car and how the interior looked. Well, they revealed those photos. So I'm going to keep talking about the car, and I'm going to show those pictures on the screen. So again, it leverages the Volvo S60 TC1 engine that makes 420 horsepower. They've upgraded two-way adjustable dampers and independent rear suspension with aluminum uprights. The car also has a ton of subtle tweaks as well. They widened the track. They slightly repositioned the greenhouse. They use carbon fiber and high-strength steel to improve the rigidity. They've done a ton to really ramp this car up and make it look the part and feel the part, and honestly charge Singer pricing, because at the end of the day, that's the market they're trying to go for with this car, right? So who they're trying to appeal to is that person, someone who values a perfected version of a car they used to love, right? That's why people are so willing to spend millions of dollars on Singers, is because it is the perfect interpretation of what an air-cooled 911 was. Well, this is Cyan Racing's attempt at creating the perfect P1800. So I'm going to show you the interior shot, and we're going to continue talking about details of this car. So again, it has a turbo four-cylinder engine. Okay, so this is a turbo, Fred, that makes 420 horsepower, and it's the same one that's used in the World Touring Car Championship car. Sorry, I lost my notes on this thing, which is frustrating me. But it revs to 7,700. The team says it's also considered using a retuned version of the original motor and also a straight 5. But for now, they're going to be sticking to this WTCC engine, which is great. The key here is this car weighs 2,182 pounds. So it has 400 plus horsepower, and it only weighs 2,100 pounds. And again, how they reached that number was extensive changes to the bodywork that includes high-strength steel, carbon fiber. They added that structural strength to make the car just a solid machine, right? The suspension's all independent. The original P1800 had a solid rear axle. That had to go. They added motorsport-grade dampers that have adjustable settings. The brakes are 4-pot in the front and the rear, and there's 18-inch forged alloys all around. So this thing is definitely serious. Lewis says, what a glorious way to die. I totally agree. But what I love about this interior is not only does it look premium, not only does it look OEM, but it's understated. If you guys remember that Ram monstrosity that we showed earlier today, I'll pull up a quick photo for those that are watching, that had just horrendous leather inside. Horrendous. Absolutely gross. Look at this. It looks like the diamond, or whatever you want to call that pattern stitching, is just tacked on. But when you're looking at the Cyan, it looks like it belongs. Everything feels right. Everything fits right. Everything just looks perfect. The P1800 Cyan does without traction control. It doesn't even get ABS. It doesn't even get a brake booster. It has a quickened version of the original car's 5-speed manual gearbox. So this thing is fully analog. I cannot stress enough how much of a driver's car this thing must be, or how raw this car is. Fred says 2,100 pounds. That's 400 pounds more than my Lotus and 300 less than my 911. Yeah, that's crazy. Crazy. Cyan test driver and one-time WTCC champion Thed Bjork is quoted as saying, "The settings of the car are not aimed at fast lap times, but rather to deliver an enjoyable and exciting driving experience. I feel my smile widening each time I control that drift angle of the car through the turn." So I couldn't do a Swedish accent, so I couldn't read that in Thed's true voice. But that said, I think that crushes the ethos of this car 100%, right? This isn't meant to set lap time records, which, by the way, neither is the Singer, right? That car is not meant for outright speed. That car is meant for the driving experience, just like this machine. Fred says, I don't think you would find a more inviting interior. I totally agree. The shifter, the wheel, the placement of everything is absolutely perfect. And what I didn't include, and what you guys should check out if you love this thing, is they also included photos of the suspension setup, and it is gorgeous. It looks beautiful. Um, I could not be more impressed with this thing, and the prices start at 500 grand, which, by the way, is like 200 or 300 grand less than a Singer 911. So do with it what you will. I think this car is probably more. I would probably be more inclined to purchase something like this over a Singer 911. Um, that's just me. A part of my appreciation for vehicles, if you will, is having something that's a little more obscure. And the P18 Cyan, definitely P1800 Cyan, excuse me, is definitely a lot more obscure than say a Singer 911, even though few of us have probably ever seen a Singer 911. But anyway, I think that $500,000 price point, while incredibly expensive, speaks to not only the attention to detail that they're giving this car, but the amount of development dollars that are going into this thing. This thing is no joke, for sure. And no, Fred, it does not come with luggage, so maybe this car is actually a waste of money. You guys tell me, would you buy a P1800 Cyan over a Singer 911 or no? Let me know. I'm curious. Curious what you guys think that are watching this or that are listening. DM to the program. Let me know what you guys are thinking. All right, we're going to finish off with one more sort of bit of sport news before we answer the chat's questions, which if you guys have any questions for the stream that aren't related to anything we talked about or some topics that you just want to discuss for the last sort of 10-15 minutes here, please post them now and we'll get to them sort of rapid fire after I discuss this last little blurb and this last move from Nissan. And I actually really like this, which is not something I often say about new Nissan products. So Thanasi, how the hell can you talk about the 2021 Nissan Rogue after talking about a car like the P1800 Cyan? Well, I'll tell you why, and that's because Nissan is offering Toyota RAV4 test drives at dealerships for for a direct comparison. So what that means is if you go to a Nissan dealership with the intention to purchase a 2021 Nissan Rogue, the Nissan dealership on deck has a 2021 or whatever year brand new RAV4 for you to test drive back to back in comparison with it. I love that. I think that's a really cool move. It not only speaks to their confidence that they have in the Rogue, but it also speaks to the fact that they understand who their largest competitor is. Sure, they sell a lot of 2021 CRVs, but that car is outdated in comparison to the new RAV4, to the new Rogue, right? So offering the creme de la creme of competition, if you will, in comparison to your machine is a big move. It's a very gutsy move. They didn't pick the worst car in the segment. They picked the best one. So I really do appreciate that move from Nissan. And for those of you that don't know, let's just give a quick update on what the 2021 Rogue is. It's all new. This is their best-selling car. So this means a lot for Nissan. And they have a lot riding on the Nissan Rogue success, right? It has a 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine, which makes 181 horsepower, funneled through a CVT. So it's definitely not an exciting car to drive. But the fact that they're putting it against a RAV4, which is also not an exciting car to drive, it doesn't really matter. Anyway, I just thought that was really cool. I figured I would loop that in there for you guys. I thought that was an interesting thing, and I'm proud of Nissan for doing that. I think that's really cool. Great move on their behalf. All right, let's get into a couple questions, shall we? Fred says, when it comes to driving on track, why do so many not want to get in-car instruction, and would you, meaning me? That's an interesting question. I think a lot of that comes to the person, and I think it's actually something that everyone suffers with to a degree. People that aren't open to criticism, people that aren't open to critiques, people that aren't open to learning, people that just think they have it all, aren't going to be willing to let anyone with them, right? I bet you a lot of people think and already believe that they're the best driver. They think and imagine that there isn't much they can learn. They just need seat time to succeed, right? These guys probably, or girls or whoever, have probably maybe, played a few racing games or things like that and think that they have the fundamentals down and don't understand that there's a lot more to that than just getting behind the wheel and putting in laps, right? It's like going to the gym. If you're lifting weights wrong, it doesn't matter how many times you do it, you're doing it wrong. You're just going to injure yourself. And it's the same thing when it comes to track driving. When it comes to me, I would love instruction. I actually want it at every opportunity because I think there's so many people that know so much more about track driving than I do. So at any chance I get to have someone in the front seat or me be in the front seat with someone else driving, I take. I've learned so much that way, whether it's a exotic driving experience with a pro race driver in the front seat that's navigating me through and that I value that much more than having my own time in the car, or whether it's someone in my car, or whether again I'm in the front seat, right? I think that's totally it's something you need, right? Because if you want to improve at anything, why not learn from someone better than you? So yeah, for me that's a no-brainer. He then asks, do you prefer open days or HPDE? I prefer, honestly, I just want instruction and I want clear track and I want to be surrounded by people that know what they're doing. I think the biggest thing that irks me is whoever goes to these events. So it could be either, right? Whether it's an HPDE or open days. To me, I prefer whichever one is surrounded by the better people. And what that means to me is those that are looking in their mirrors, those that are aware of their surroundings, and those that have solid machines. I think that people that aren't looking in their mirrors and not giving point buys, or people that should wait before driving around, like things like that, just make a track day a bad experience, whether it's HPD or an open day. So it doesn't really matter to me. I just care about who's there and the timing. So for me, it doesn't really matter. Either or, whatever just gets me on track more, quite frankly, which I'm excited to do with this machine. So Fred also says, Extreme Experience is coming to New Hampshire 2 times, and he better see me. They're running the GT3 RS and AMG GTR. Funny you mentioned that. I did the Dream Drives experience in Vegas last year, and I drove a regular 991 GT3 and an AMG GTR on it. It was unbelievable. I really, really enjoyed the AMG GTR, and I'll be honest, it made the 911 kind of look stupid. That could be because the one that I drove had a bunch of lights on, bunch of check engine lights on, so maybe the 911 that I drove wasn't peak Porsche, but at the end of the day, the AMG GTR put down, I think, 8 laps of like a mile course that they had out there in Vegas, and it stood up to everything. It was a monster. I really, really loved that thing. Yeah, Fred, our competition. Hey, I'll come check you guys out, and I will give an honest review of which experience I liked better. How about that? I hope that's good enough. But yeah, as always, thank you guys for joining. Fred says they maintain their machines very well. Okay, so if you guys are interested in New Hampshire Extreme Experience, check it out. Exotic driving. Who doesn't want to drive, really cool cars? AMG GTRs, 911 GT3s, stuff like that. I'll definitely be checking it out, and I'll give a review on the podcast for sure. As we close up here, thank you guys for joining. I appreciate all the comments in the chat, both on Facebook and on YouTube. We're streaming on both. Thank you for continuing to join me and the live stream and the podcast. Thank you guys for continuing to listen during what is an incredibly weird era, and a lot of things are changing in terms of, the pandemic is a real thing. I'm leveling up the stream as we go, so we're including things like chats, we're including things like alerts, we're getting better overall experiences. So I urge you guys, if you're listening to the podcast, to check out the VODs of the stream, which are on YouTube. You'll be able to rewatch this over and over and over again to your heart's content on the MoneyShift YouTube channel. So check that out for sure. You can find us on Facebook at MoneyShift Podcast, on YouTube at MoneyShift, on Instagram at MoneyShift_. Thank you everyone again for tuning in